Hi everyone, it's Kathy here with week 8, automated decision making. So my key learning this week was being able to conceptualize different systems as cybernetic systems. So systems that monitor conditions using a sensor and then take some corrective action, actuating something. So leveraging from week 3 and 4 when we learned about sensors and actuators and data respectively. Then I started to cogitate on what other systems could be seen as cybernetic, and looking at Martin and Blair's masterclasses and then the visit to the Australian Parliament House, it got me thinking about our electoral system as a form of cybernetic system. So, for example, the population takes a vote during an election, and this sets the default state or base state for the electoral system for the direction it's heading in. Politicians then sense or take the pulse of public sentiment through interactions with constituents, engagements with ministerial advisors and lobbyists and so on. And there's a corollary there to the way that Norbert Wiener thought about the nervous system not being able to function in isolation in his introduction to cybernetics. It needs feedback in order to function effectively. It cannot exist in isolation. It needs to be able to sense things. So in the parliamentary metaphor, bills are drafted that respond to the data gathered through sensing. The interaction with ministerial advisors and lobbyists, and there's a question here of whether those actors have too strong a voice in the process. What other voices are not being heard? And then the bill goes through the lower house, usually uncontested if it's raised by a government minister. But when it gets to the Senate, it's scrutinised in detail, with the Senate having the ability to convene committees and call witnesses and seek evidence. So from the viewpoint of a cybernetic system, the Senate is essentially considering the decision with the bill by gaining more data. It's sensing more widely, getting a broader picture, hearing more voices, eliciting more viewpoints, and so on. And in a way, I'm not sure if I've got this theoretically right, but in a way the Senate is like a second order cybernetic system, observing the first order one, which would be the lower house. And if the data indicate that the bill should be passed, then the Senate agrees with the proposal, essentially endorsing the decision, seconding the decision of the lower house, and the bill becomes law. And then, with that law gaining assent, this actuates various agencies who change rules or regulations or the environment, and then the cycle starts again. So, that there's a metaphor there for Parliament as a cybernetic system. We can also see themes of responsibility and accountability coming through using this framing as well, particularly around the separation of duties and responsibility. For instance, the neutrality of the public service and the process for appointing public servants. And it's really interesting for me that there weren't any governance or political scientists in attendance at the 10 Macy conferences, even though Wiener and von Neumann could see the applicability of their theories to this domain. And I wonder whether the Westminster system or the American political system would have been influenced or changed if there were political scientists as part of that conversation around cybernetics. We'll never know. Well, not until we build a time machine and go back, and that would make a great movie. Anyway, that's an aside. Back to accountability. In this framing, the government is ultimately responsible to the electorate, to the voters, but they can't consult them on every decision. So the other mechanisms are used, such as the Senate, to make decision making more inclusive while still being devolved. But at the end of the day, there is clear accountability. If the government doesn't make good decisions, the populace can vote them out, 18th of May. Using the cybernetic system as a metaphor, it's almost like having a kill switch. So where the system is misbehaving, it can be reset. So that's some reflections, I guess, about thinking about feedback loops and automated decision making in the context of Parliament, and an attempt to synthesise those sorts of two two frames of reference. So what's one thing I'm grateful for? So this week I'm really grateful for the depth of technical knowledge I have and the ability to cut through the hyperbole and the inflated claims in media about emerging technologies. The article from Diane Martin in the reading, The Myths of the Awesome Thinking Machine, and the representation of computer technology in the media and how it can shape acceptance or otherwise really resonated with me. And I think reflecting on that, how we communicate about emerging technologies doesn't just shape public opinion, it also shapes political opinion. The narratives have power. We shape policy in many ways through shaping the narrative of civil discourse, of public opinion discourse. So that's one thing I'm grateful for, the ability to cut through technical hyperbole. So what's one thing I'll do differently this week? Well, when I was working on my essay, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole, or several rabbit holes, and I wasn't centered on the readings in the reading list, and that was a mistake. Reading through Brenda's essay, she'd drawn a lot from the reading list, and they were very salient points. So I think the learning for me this week is to be aware of when you're going down a rabbit hole, come back to the readings and center on those, then jump back out from there. Be grounded in the readings. They're chosen for a reason. So that's a reflection on my professional practice, my learning practice that I think I need to iterate a bit. I think we were adding a question for, what's one piece of feedback you'd have about the course this week? And for me, it's about dovetailing different requirements for the course. That's not making a lot of sense. The course is very heavy in particular weeks, and I found week 8 to be particularly heavy. We had this essay which required a lot of deep reading, not just breadth but depth. Quite a lot of depth there, particularly in some of the theories on justice and equity. And we're getting to the crunchy, the pointy end of the maker projects as well. I just wonder whether if I were to draw two line graphs or two waves, what is the workload in each subject for each week? I think for this week they would both have fairly high amplitude, and I wonder whether that would be a way of sort of identifying the load in each week, so you could try and distribute that a little bit more evenly. I've found this week particularly heavy. That's it from me for this week. I'll see you for week 9.